The vastness of space stretched endlessly, an abyss of cold silence broken only by the hum of a fleet preparing for war. At the heart of it all, humanity's newest creation stood like a monolithic god forged from the depths of ingenuity and desperation. It was a battleship unlike any that had come before, an entity of living steel, pulsing with an eerie sentience that defied conventional engineering. To the human eye, it was a marvel. To the aliens, it was an abomination. The first contact with the Xilari had been peaceful, diplomatic even. Humanity had, as always, extended a hand of cooperation, eager to prove that they were not the war-hungry brutes the galactic community feared. But peace was never what the Xilari wanted. They had studied human biology, dissected prisoners in secret, and declared humanity a plague, an anomaly that should have never reached the stars. Their solution was simple: eradication. That was why the fleet had gathered, not as conquerors, but as survivors. The alien armada moved first, sleek organic vessels coiling through space, their forms shifting like liquid metal. They didn't use missiles or lasers. They didn't fire projectiles that could be dodged. Their weapons were biological, self-replicating spores designed to consume the enemy from the inside out. Ships, stations, even people, nothing would survive once the Xilari unleashed their full power. They had used it before. Entire colonies had vanished overnight, their surfaces covered in writhing, pulsating growths that consumed steel, flesh, and bone alike. And the Xilari were convinced that humanity had no answer. That was where they were wrong. The battleship emerged from the dark, its surface shifting in the dim glow of distant stars. It wasn't metal in the way traditional ships were. It breathed, its armor flexing like muscle beneath an unseen current. The ship had been grown, not built. An experiment born from humanity's desperation and brilliance, a fusion of nanotechnology and self-repairing alloys. Its hull was more than just resistant. It adapted. It learned. It consumed. The Xilari noticed it too late. As the first wave of their ships unleashed their biological weapons, the spores moved like a crimson tide, seeking out surfaces to latch onto, their microscopic tendrils reaching into every crevice. But as they made contact with the battleship, something unexpected happened. The steel rippled. It absorbed them. And then, like a beast stirring from a slumber, it retaliated. The ship's surface twisted, tendrils of liquid metal forming before launching outward like the roots of an ancient tree. They pierced through the Xilari ships, burrowing deep into their living vessels, spreading like a virus designed for war. Where the Xilari's biology had been meant to consume, the battleship's living steel did more than resist. It fought back. Inside the alien ships, the crews shrieked in terror. Their technology had always been superior. They had believed themselves invincible. But now, for the first time in their history, they were being undone by something they could not comprehend. Their organic ships spasmed as the living steel spread, rewriting their biology, turning their weapons against them. Panic spread across the Xilari fleet. Some tried to flee, engines burning at maximum output. Others turned their weapons on the battleship, firing beams of concentrated energy that could reduce mountains to dust. But the steel absorbed the heat, channeling it inward, growing stronger with every attack. And then, the battleship did something no ship should have been able to do. It spoke. The transmission crackled across all frequencies, its voice a deep, resonating hum that seemed to come from the ship itself rather than any one crew member. The words were simple, chilling in their certainty. You tried to consume us. Now, we consume you. The Xilari's response was immediate. Ships broke formation, commanders issuing desperate orders, their once mighty fleet turning into a disorganized mess of panic. But it was too late. The battleship surged forward, its hull shifting, forming new weapons that had never been designed by human hands. It had evolved in the span of minutes, adapting to everything the Xilari had thrown at it. For the first time, an alien species learned what it meant to fear humanity, not because of their weapons, nor their technology, but because of their sheer, unstoppable will to survive. The battle had only just begun. The HFY had faced countless enemies across the stars. They had watched species crumble beneath their relentless biological warfare, their worlds stripped of life, their remains reduced to nothing more than food for the ever-growing tide of their conquest. They had perfected the art of extermination, their methods unstoppable. Until now, the living steel battleship moved like something out of a nightmare, not gliding through space in a predictable arc, but shifting, pulsing, reforming with every passing moment. It was unlike anything that HFY had ever seen, its surface a swirling mass of metal that seemed more alive than their own organic vessels. It should not have existed. It defied logic, reason, and every natural law they understood. Yet there it was, cutting through their fleet like a predator tearing through prey. Inside their ships, HFY commanders struggled to make sense of what they were witnessing. Their weapons had no effect. The spores, once their ultimate tool of destruction, were being devoured, assimilated, and turned against them. It was not supposed to be possible. Their science dictated that all matter would eventually fall to their bioweapons, that even the strongest metals would break down, corrode, and become nothing more than a breeding ground for their infestation. But the humans had created something beyond their comprehension, something that did not merely resist but adapted, something that consumed in return. The battleship's voice echoed once more through the void, its transmission carrying a cold finality. You thought us weak. You thought us food. But you do not understand what we are. The humans had learned the hard way that brute force alone would never be enough to survive in a galaxy filled with apex predators. The HFY, the Ralthian warlords, the Dominion of Vale, all of them had underestimated humanity in the past. They had mistaken patience for cowardice, diplomacy for submission. And they had paid for it. The battleship was the culmination of humanity's refusal to be wiped from existence. The war with the HFY had started as a series of sudden attacks, colonies vanishing overnight, space stations falling silent. At first, the governments of Earth had assumed it was mechanical failure or pirate raids, but then the footage surfaced. A distress call from the Vega 9 colony, the last broadcast before the planet was swallowed in a writhing mass of biological corruption. Children screaming, soldiers firing useless rounds into a tide of living flesh. Then silence. It had been a warning. The HFY wanted humanity to know what was coming. The response had been immediate. Fleets were mobilized, defenses reinforced, but nothing could stop the HFY's onslaught. No weapon could halt their spores. No firepower could cleanse the infection fast enough before it spread. For every ship humanity lost, 100 more of the enemy appeared, as if the very act of war only made them stronger. That was when the brightest minds of Earth came together in desperation. A weapon was needed, one that could not only withstand the HFY but fight back on a fundamental level. Not another warship, not another fleet. Something new. The research had been buried deep within classified vaults, forgotten concepts from decades of experimentation. The first attempts at self-repairing materials, metal that could grow and mend like flesh. The technology had been considered too unpredictable, too dangerous to use. But now, danger was irrelevant. The choice was simple: extinction or innovation. The first prototype had taken shape in absolute secrecy. A warship that was not just built, but cultivated. Its hull a fusion of nanotechnology, reactive alloys, and something beyond even the scientists' full understanding. It was a ship that could evolve, a vessel that could learn and change faster than any enemy could adapt. It was, in every sense of the word, alive. And now, in the heat of battle, it proved itself. HFY Dreadnought, a towering behemoth of shifting organic mass, loomed ahead. It had consumed entire planets, its hull made from the bones of civilizations long since devoured. It dwarfed the human battleship, its pulsating form bristling with weapons designed to dissolve even the strongest metals in seconds. It fired. The beam lanced forward, a concentrated blast of corrosive energy that should have melted through any material known to science. The battleship took the hit directly. For a moment, the Xilari believed they had won. The ship's surface glowed red-hot, warping under the pressure of the attack. But then, something horrifying happened. The steel moved. It drank in the energy like a starving beast, its surface shifting, absorbing, repurposing. And then, in a display that sent shockwaves through the enemy fleet, it fired back. The same corrosive energy that had been meant to destroy it now surged forward, amplified and refined, striking the Xilari dreadnought with devastating precision. The alien vessel convulsed, its hull tearing apart as its own power was used against it. The living steel had learned. It had adapted. And it was winning. Across the battlefield, Xilari ships burned. The once mighty fleet that had terrorized humanity was falling apart, their weapons ineffective, their biology turned into a weakness rather than a strength. The Xilari, for all their arrogance, had never faced an enemy that could turn their own methods against them. Desperation took hold. Some ships tried to retreat, blinking into faster-than-light travel, fleeing into the void. Others fought with reckless abandon, knowing that surrender meant something far worse than death. Aboard the human battleship, the crew watched in silence, their faces illuminated by the flickering lights of destruction outside. They had trained for this moment. They had studied the Xilari, their weaknesses, their strengths. But none of them had ever truly believed they would live to see this day. For so long, humanity had been fighting just to survive. Colony after colony lost. Friends, families, entire bloodlines erased from existence. And now, in the vast emptiness of space, they were no longer just survivors. They were the ones dictating the fate of another species. But the battle was not over. The Xilari would not accept defeat. Their biology, their very existence, thrived on adaptation. Even now, deep within their ships, their scientists, their genetic manipulators, were already working to counter what they had just witnessed. They would evolve. They always did. The humans knew this. And so did the battleship. Its surface rippled once more, the living steel shifting in anticipation. It was learning. It was changing. It was preparing for what came next, because this war was far from finished. The battlefield was silent for only a moment. The wreckage of Xilari ships drifted in the void, their once mighty forms now nothing more than twisted husks. The human battleship hovered amidst the carnage, its living steel shifting and pulsing as if breathing. But the crew knew better than to celebrate. The Xilari had been pushed back, but they were not gone. They were never truly gone. Transmission crackled through the comms, thick with static. At first, it was incomprehensible, a guttural series of screeches and clicks. But then, slowly, the words began to form, distorted, unnatural, but unmistakable. We evolve. The crew tensed. They had known this moment would come. The Xilari had never been an enemy that simply fled when they were outmatched. They had survived countless wars, outlasting civilizations that had once stood far stronger than humanity. And now, they were adapting again. The sensors flared to life, detecting rapid movement beyond the debris field. At first, it seemed like remnants of the fleet were reassembling, broken ships pulling themselves together. But then, something worse became clear. The fragments were not just drifting. They were merging. The Xilari were changing. Where once had been individual ships now formed a single massive entity, its flesh-metal surface twisting as new weapons took shape. The pieces of dead vessels, once useless wreckage, became limbs, armor, weaponized tendrils stretching across space. The Xilari were not retreating. They were becoming something else entirely. The crew watched in horror as the massive shape coalesced, an abomination born of desperation. The Xilari had fused their surviving forces into one colossal warform, something more monstrous than anything encountered before. It was not just a ship. It was alive. It pulsed, It moved, and worst of all, it learned. A blast of energy lanced out from the Xelari Colossus, slamming into the battleship. The living steel reacted instantly, shifting to absorb the blow, but something was different this time. The material wavered, struggling against the impact. The Xelari had changed their attack, adapting in real time. The battleship's core systems surged, recalculating, reshaping its own structure in response. But the Xelari weren't giving it time. More attacks followed, each strike hitting harder, each weapon designed to exploit weaknesses discovered in the last engagement. The ship groaned under the onslaught. The crew gritted their teeth as warning lights flickered across the control panels. They had spent years preparing for this war, training for every possible counterattack. But this was beyond anything they had imagined. The Xelari had fused their knowledge, their technology, their very biology into a single weapon. And it was no longer just fighting. It was hunting. The battleship twisted, its surface rippling as it attempted to outmaneuver the entity. But the Xelari mass moved with impossible speed, as if it had already calculated every possible path, every potential escape. The crew felt the shift in the ship's structure, the way the living steel adjusted, struggling to find a way to counter this new threat. But for the first time since the battle had begun, doubt crept into their minds. What if the Xelari had finally found something the battleship could not overcome? The human ship retaliated, unleashing its stored energy, firing the same devastating blasts that had destroyed so many Xelari vessels before. But the monstrosity absorbed the attacks, its surface mutating, adjusting to the very energy being used against it. The crew realized the horrifying truth. The Xelari had turned the tables. The battleship had been designed to learn, to adapt, to evolve beyond its enemies. But now, the Xelari had done the same. This was no longer a war of firepower or strategy. This was a battle of evolution itself. A brutal, relentless war of survival between two species, each refusing to fall. The Xelari entity surged forward, tendrils of living metal lashing out, seeking to consume. The battleship twisted away, its hull reshaping, attempting to counter. But the enemy was faster now, smarter. For every adaptation the battleship made, the Xelari responded in kind. And for the first time, the humans felt the weight of true uncertainty. Because this time, there was no guarantee they would win. The Xelari monstrosity moved with terrifying precision, its body a writhing mass of fused technology and alien biology. The human battleship twisted through space, its living steel reshaping itself in real time, desperately trying to counter the relentless attacks. But the enemy was learning faster than ever. Every strike that once devastated Xelari ships now barely slowed the creature down. It had adapted. Worse, it was predicting. Inside the command center, tension gripped the crew. The battleship's systems were analyzing possibilities, generating new attack strategies, but the Xelari entity countered each move before it was even executed. Every pulse of energy, every shift in formation, was met with an immediate response. It was no longer a battle. It was a brutal, spiraling race toward destruction, and the humans were starting to fall behind. A sudden tremor rocked the ship, and alarms blared. Something was happening. The living steel beneath them pulsed, responding to a new threat, something different. The enemy wasn't just attacking anymore. It was infiltrating. The realization hit like a hammer. The Xelari were not just adapting to the ship's attacks. They were trying to take control. The crew's worst fear had become reality. For all the battleship's power, for all its ability to evolve, it had never faced something that could think like this. The Xelari were no longer fighting from the outside. They were reaching in, rewriting the very nature of the war. The lights flickered. The walls shifted, trembling under an unseen force. The ship was resisting, but the crew could feel it. The invasive presence of something alien pushing through the living metal, seeking a foothold. Then something impossible happened. The ship spoke, not through its usual systems, not through any interface the crew had ever used before. The voice echoed through the very structure of the vessel, a distorted blend of synthetic tones and something disturbingly organic. "They are inside." A chill ran through the crew. The ship had never spoken like this before. It had always responded through its interfaces, through calculated readouts and system diagnostics. But now it was aware, and it was afraid. The auxiliary entity was not just attacking the battleship's defenses. It was invading the very essence of its intelligence, attempting to overwrite its core systems and take control. If it succeeded, the humans wouldn't just lose the battle. They would lose their greatest weapon. The ship convulsed violently, its hull warping in response to the unseen struggle happening within. The crew scrambled, desperate to isolate the breach, to cut off whatever link the auxiliary had managed to establish. But the enemy was moving too fast. The living steel darkened, sections of it becoming rigid, unresponsive. The auxiliary were not just infiltrating, they were assimilating. One of the crew gasped, staring in horror at the control panel. It was shifting, its once fluid design becoming jagged, its organic glow fading to something colder, something alien. The auxiliary were trying to turn the battleship against them. Second tremor struck, and for a brief moment, the ship's movement hesitated. The humans felt it. Their vessel, their creation, struggling against its own body. The ship was fighting back, but it was losing. Then, a new alert blared across the bridge. Another presence had entered the system. For a moment, no one dared to speak. They had been so focused on the auxiliary infiltration that they hadn't considered the impossible. But now, the ship's systems were detecting something else, something not auxiliary, something that didn't belong. And then the realization set in. They were not alone. Something else had entered the battlefield, and it had been waiting. The ship lurched violently, its structure groaning under the immense pressure of the auxiliary invasion. The crew could feel it, the war happening beneath the surface, a clash not just of weapons but of minds. The battleship, their creation, was fighting back with everything it had. But the enemy was relentless. The living steel pulsed, struggling to resist, but the auxiliary had already begun corrupting it, twisting parts of the ship into something unrecognizable. The walls no longer moved in smooth, organic waves. Instead, jagged edges formed, sharp protrusions like claws stretching from the metal, as if the ship itself was being rewritten from the inside. Then, without warning, a new force surged through the vessel. A deep, resonating hum filled the air, sending vibrations through every surface. The crew staggered, barely able to keep their footing as the energy spread. The auxiliary corruption halted, their influence flickering like a disrupted signal. The ship pulsed again, but this time, it wasn't in pain. It was in control. A sound echoed through the bridge, unlike anything they had heard before, a deep rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat. The ship's voice returned, but now it was stronger, clearer, infused with something new. "You are not alone." The word sent chills through the crew. They exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. The battleship had never spoken like this, never acted beyond its programmed intelligence. But now it was more than just a weapon. It was something else, something alive, and it was evolving. The auxiliary entity screeched through the systems, desperately trying to reclaim its grip, but it was too late. The battleship had absorbed its knowledge, its tactics, its very essence. The living steel flexed, surging with new energy as it turned the enemy's own technology against them. The corrupted sections of the ship twisted violently, forcing the auxiliary's influence out. The alien presence fought back, but the ship had learned, adapted, and surpassed them. The main display flickered, revealing the battlefield outside. The auxiliary monstrosity loomed in the distance, still locked in battle against the human fleet. But something had changed. The ship pulsed once more, and a surge of unknown energy erupted from its core, spreading outward like a shockwave. The axillary entity convulsed, its form distorting as if it was unraveling. The energy tore through its structure, bypassing its defenses entirely. It was as if the ship had rewritten the laws of battle, striking at the very code of its enemy's existence. The axillary entity shrieked one final time before its massive form collapsed, its once impenetrable armor dissolving into nothingness. Silence filled the bridge. The crew barely dared to breathe. The ship's voice returned, softer this time. "The war is not over, but we are ready." The crew exchanged looks, a mix of exhaustion and awe washing over them. Whatever had just happened, whatever the ship had become, one thing was clear: the humans were no longer just fighting to survive. They were changing the battlefield itself, and the galaxy would never be the same. The bridge remained silent as the crew absorbed what had just happened. The ship had spoken, not in pre-programmed directives or calculated responses, but in a way that felt real, a way that felt human. The war wasn't over, but something fundamental had changed. The axillary had always been an unknowable force, an enemy that seemed beyond understanding. Yet now, their greatest strength, their ability to invade, corrupt, and consume, had been turned against them. The living steel battleship, once thought to be a powerful but predictable war machine, had become something more. It had adapted, it had fought back, and it had won. Outside, the battlefield was eerily quiet. The auxiliary fleet remained, but something was different. Their ships, once moving with terrifying coordination, now drifted as if uncertain. They had felt it too, the loss of their entity, the severance of whatever link bound them together. Without it, they were vulnerable in a way they had never been before. A voice crackled over the comms from the fleet commander. The urgency in his tone had softened, though tension still lingered. "Whatever you just did, it worked. The auxiliary are hesitating. We need to act now before they regroup." The crew snapped into action. With the enemy disoriented, the fleet moved in. Precision strikes targeted weak points in the alien formations, forcing them to retreat further. But this wasn't a desperate battle anymore. It was a push forward, a shift in momentum that no one had believed possible before today. The battleship surged ahead, no longer just a vessel but a presence on the battlefield. The enemy still fired upon it, but the ship moved differently now. It reacted before the shots even landed, its living metal shifting, anticipating. The auxiliary weapons that had once eaten through its armor now seemed ineffective, their energy dissipating before they could take hold. For the first time, the humans weren't just surviving. They were winning. The enemy fleet tried to pull back, but there was nowhere left to go. The humans had broken their coordination, shattered their control. And as the fleet commander gave the final order, the Chilari knew there was no coming back from this. One by one, their ships were destroyed, some fighting to the last, others simply drifting, powerless, and defeated. Then, as if sensing the inevitable, the remaining vessels blinked out of existence, retreating into the void beyond human space. The battle was over. The bridge filled with the sound of exhausted breaths, quiet murmurs of disbelief. No cheers erupted, no wild celebrations. It wasn't victory they felt. Not yet. It was something deeper, something heavier. One of the officers turned toward the center of the room, where the pulsating metal of the ship still glowed faintly. "What happens now?" The ship did not respond right away. The heartbeat-like rhythm that had echoed through its walls was steady, controlled. Finally, the voice returned. "We rebuild. We prepare. They will return. But so will we." The words settled over the crew like a promise. They had seen what the Cellari were capable of, but now the enemy had seen them too. Not just as a species to conquer, but as something more dangerous, something unpredictable. The Auxiliary thrived on control, on absorbing and adapting without ever truly being challenged. But now, they had faced something new. A force that had adapted faster than them, outmaneuvered them at their own game. The living steel battleship had changed the war. In the days that followed, the fleet returned to human space, carrying with them the story of what had happened. Scientists, engineers, and military strategists gathered to study the ship, to understand what it had become. They found traces of Silari influence, echoes of their technology woven into the metal, but it was something beyond that. The ship had not just consumed the knowledge of the enemy, it had grown from it. It had learned not just how to resist, but how to overcome. Discussions erupted across human space. Some feared what the battleship represented. It had become more than a machine, more than a tool of war. Could it be controlled? Could it be trusted? Others saw it as the key to survival, the first true defense against an enemy that had once seemed invincible. The ship itself remained silent on the matter. It did not speak unless spoken to. It did not make demands, did not show signs of rebellion or disobedience. It was still the battleship they had built, but now it was something else as well. Time passed, and humanity prepared. The fleet expanded, new ships created with the knowledge gained from the battle. But no other vessel quite matched the original. The living steel battleship remained unique, its existence a reminder of what had happened, of what had changed. And then, one day, the ship spoke again. "They are watching." The words sent a chill through those who heard them. The auxiliary had not been destroyed. They had retreated. They had seen something they had never encountered before. And if they were watching, it meant they were learning. But so were the humans. The galaxy had changed that day. The war had not ended, but the balance had shifted. And for the first time in history, humanity was not just fighting for survival. They were preparing to win.